Today we're going to talk about early onset puberty. And this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart because it comes up so often when I'm working with clients. Now, before we get started, I always like to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Terry Egan. I am a child and adolescent therapist, a former school psychologist, an author, and a podcast host. And you can see this is a picture of me holding my most recently published book called Adolescence: A Parent's Guide. And it was published in February, coming up on a year. And some of the topics we talk about today are mentioned in this book. So if it seems like it could be a helpful resource to learn more about how to parent your teen, pick it up on Amazon. All right. So we're going to talk about early onset puberty. And I just want to take a minute to talk about, what does that even mean? And so basically it means that your child is showing signs of puberty earlier than their same age peers. So whoever their peer group is, if it's the kids at school, we want it to be the same age peers. So if your kid happens to hang out with a bunch of kids in the neighborhood who are younger than older, that's not who we're comparing them with. We're comparing your child and their onset of puberty symptoms. So for girls, it might be getting their period. And I put in 4th or 5th grade just because I think most of us would agree that would be on the earlier side of a girl starting menstruation. Breast development, acne. With boys, we might see a big growth spurt, broader shoulders, a crackly voice, more facial hair. So if your child is reaching those milestones earlier than their same age peers, then they would fall in this category of being a child who's experiencing early onset puberty. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. It basically usually it's primarily genetics that are at play. Here in the United States, we generally have good nutrition for our children. So we know that girls are reaching or having their first period at younger and younger ages. And sometimes too, if your child has a higher body mass index at a younger age, that can trigger some of the hormone responses that result in them getting their first period. But generally, when a child starts to experience or what their timing is going to be like is based on their genetics. So if you have that child's mother of that girl got her period when she was 12, then it stands to reason your child's probably going to fall in a similar time pattern. So I want to take a few minutes and talk about the impact on boys of undergoing early puberty. So usually in boys, when they start to go through puberty and they start to have that growth spurt and more of the muscle mass, it's usually a pretty positive experience for them. It's sometimes having the advantage over their peers when it comes to height and weight and muscle mass can really give their athletic ability, enhance their athletic ability. And so that can be strongly related to these boys having a positive experience, just because a lot of times boys have an easier time socially when they have some athletic ability. So if reaching puberty a little younger results in them having even improved athletic ability, then that is a positive experience for most boys. So, and usually if boys are reaching puberty a little earlier, then their puberty rate is matching early maturing girls. So they might have the looks of an older boy, they're maybe attracting girls who look a little bit older, maybe they're more hormonal and starting to feel more sexualized feelings at a little bit earlier age. And so generally when research is done with boys, they indicate that this is a positive experience. So they indicate that they're more likely to have an increase in popularity. They feel pretty good about themselves. They have a positive body image. They are more likely to experiment with substances at a younger age. And we're going to talk a little bit more about why that is. But that is a characteristic of boys who reaches puberty at a younger age. Early puberty in girls. Now, this is a different experience for girls. So if you're a girl and you reach puberty earlier, so you maybe are showing breast development, maybe you've gotten your period, maybe you are experiencing acne, whatever it is oftentimes that's a much more negative experience for girls. They'll express a lot more self-consciousness. They will have body image issues. Sometimes they talk about, wanting to hide, I want to hunch over so no one sees that I have, breasts at this age. People can treat them differently. If you're a girl who looks like an older girl, and then people can make assumptions about how sexual you are. They can equate or make assumptions that your behavior is going to be like that of an older girl. And we know that girls who reach puberty younger are interested in hanging out with other girls who have about the same degree of puberty. So let's say you have an 11-year-old, and she, because she reached puberty earlier, looks more like a 14-year-old. Then she's more likely to be attracted to hanging out with other girls who look about 14. That's going to be the group that she feels like she fits in with because they look like her. But your 11-year-old still has an 11-year-old brain. So you have an 11-year-old with an 11-year-old brain who has a body who looks to be about 14, who's hanging around with other girls who might be 14. And so this puts them in a situation when they're more likely to be exposed to 14-year-old behavior. So they might be exposed to things at a younger age, whether it's drinking, whether it's drugs, whether it's sexual activity, whether it's just more mature content online, whatever it is, these kids, these girls specifically, are more likely to be exposed to that, which can make them be in situations where they're not equipped to handle it. They could be more likely to be taken advantage of or coerced. So it just can add a level of stress. Also, I mentioned if you have an 11-year-old girl who looks to be 14, they have that underdeveloped brain and the mature body, which can lead to more impulsive behaviors. So this might be a girl who doesn't necessarily have the same ability to stop and think that her peers that she's hanging out with do. So it can just be a little bit more risky. These girls often express that they feel more low self-esteem, that they're more likely to feel shame over their bodies, that they're more likely to have symptoms of anxiety and depression. So we just have to keep in mind that this experience of girls having early onset puberty can be very, very different than what it is for boys. And we know that girls who come from homes where there's harsh or uninvolved parenting will have an even more negative experience. And there's some evidence to suggest that there's like a evolutionary component to it, where because girls, if they come from a hard, stressful childhood circumstance, it is in their best interest to reach maturity at a younger age and then be able to go and run their own household. So there's some research that indicates that this might be why girls from more stressful households are more likely to have puberty triggered earlier for them. So it's just something to keep in mind. And it isn't, like I said, one specific factor that contributes to early puberty. It's primarily genetic, but there's also those environmental factors that can play a role too. So as a parent, we want, especially for girls, parents to look for negative self-talk. We want them, and by that I just mean saying hateful things about themselves. I'm a loser. No one likes me. I'm ugly. I'm worth nothing. I can't do this. When kids are starting to direct that type of language towards themselves, that's a worrisome sign because it does certainly impact their self-esteem and their sense of competence. If they're getting unwelcome attention from older teens. So I'm going to tell you a little anecdote that happened with a client. I had a client who, same situation. She was 10, turning 11. She had hit puberty early. She really resembled a child who was probably more in that 14 or 15-year-old range. So she wanted to hang out with 14 and 15-year-old girls, and she wanted to dress like them. So here she was with her 10-year-old brain wearing the itty-bitty bikini that her 15-year-old peers were wearing. And she went to our local amusement park, and her mom said, well, I just wanted her to fit in with her friends. All the rest of them were wearing bikinis, and she went too. And so then when she went, she attracted, and this is not to her fault or anything like that, but she attracted the attention of boys who are about that age group of 14 or 15 years old. And they started talking to her, and they were, making, comments that suggested they were interested in her and thought she was pretty. I didn't get the sense that these boys said anything abusive or that they had an intention of being disrespectful, but they thought they were talking to a girl who was 14 or 15 years old, and she was 10 turning 11. So she felt extraordinarily uncomfortable. She felt out of her league, and she really didn't have just the same awareness that her peers had about wearing a bathing suit in public. Like, I think she didn't recognize that had she been wearing, shorts and a t-shirt that other 10-year-olds wore, she might have had a different experience. Once again, I want to reiterate, this is not her fault. She is not to be blamed for this. It doesn't matter what she wears. She should be treated respectfully by any person she comes into contact with. But these boys, my understanding of the situation is these boys really did feel they were speaking to an older girl, and so they were treating her like she was an older girl. So that's just an example of unwelcome attention that can come from older teens. Sometimes these kids experience sadness. So if you're a parent and you're seeing your kid is down, saying those negative comments, more quick to cry, maybe has some irritability, makes comments about their body, if they're withdrawing from previously enjoyed activities. So maybe they don't feel like they fit in with their peer group, and so that leads them to reject some of the activities that they've always found to be enjoyable. That could be another sign that could be worrisome if your child is struggling with having early onset puberty, or if they're practicing secretive online activity. So this is something I want to take another minute and talk about, because a lot of times if you have a kid who looks a little bit older and their peer group is older, and even just if some of their peers are, and they're exposed to older kid things, then they are more likely to be exposed to things like social media, just their connection with some of their peers are just naturally going to lend itself to more mature language, more sexualized language and content. Some of the emotional intensity or the emotional intelligence that's needed to understand it might not be there. So if you see that your child has kind of got in over their head online, and they're, expressing that they feel uncomfortable, or they're just showing signs that they're under stress, or they're being secretive, like, it is important to recognize, especially if they have images out there. And, if they have an Instagram photo up there, a profile picture, and it looks like they're 15 or 16, and the kids that are friending them on their Instagram account are also kids who are older, then that can just put them in a situation where they're not equipped to manage some of the conversation or the advances that some of these other kids make. A couple things, some things that parents could consider when it comes to supporting your child if they have early onset puberty. This is one of the things is not to speak negatively about puberty. We know that kids respond better to puberty when it's done in a way when it's discussed in a way where it's matter of fact, it's positive, they're coming from a place of education versus like, getting your period is the worst. Or, nothing, you're just going to be so hormonal, and you're going to be so out, not yourself, and you're just going to be so grouchy and mean to everyone. And so if kids are spoken to like that, or if parents, or they come from like a community that really discusses puberty as being something that is a negative experience, then kids will in turn have a thought process that mimics that. So whereas if you speak about it of like, yep, it's part of life, it's not, it's something that we all go through. There might be some hiccups. There might be some things that are really great about it. Ask any questions, and parents are really great about teaching kids about what to expect. Then it's just going to feel better to them, and it's probably going to go better. I want to skip to this third one here and then go back to the second one. The third one says, make sure they have a high quality sex education. I cannot impress upon this enough. There's a lot of times that as parents, we get it in our idea of like, all right, I'm going to tell my kids about the reproductive system in third grade. I'm going to tell my kids, give them sex education talk when they're in fifth grade or sixth grade. The fact is, if you have a child who is showing signs of early onset puberty, it is really important to roll that conversation back so that they're equipped with the knowledge they need to have before it becomes relevant. So I'm a big fan of talking to kids about their bodies and how those bodies are used and giving them really age-appropriate education about bodies and sex from a very, very early age. I think it's a matter of keeping the conversation developmentally appropriate, where you're using words that are familiar, you're, just inching along their knowledge base as they get more curious, as they know the names for things, as they ask, as they notice that some people are married, or some people are in love, or some people kiss, or some people have babies. And those questions start to evolve, that you really just answer them in an honest and upfront way with accurate language, and you keep it brief, and you repeat those topics over and over in little snippets so that it just kind of eases your kid into knowledge about sex and reproduction and bodies and all of that. Versus like, I'm going to sit them down on this one magical day and tell them about this big, have this big talk, have the talk. So it's important for all kids to have a high quality sex education. But if your child is experiencing puberty at a younger age, it is really important that they are armed with the knowledge about their body and what's happening. First of all, it will cause them to be less stressed. And second of all, it will support them so they know what to do if they're in a more vulnerable situation. So if your kid looks like they're 15 and they have no idea what a condom is, then that's probably could potentially put them in a situation that feels more stressful than if they already knew what those things were. So just wanted to mention that. So don't speak negatively about puberty. Make sure your kid is really informed about their body and sex at an appropriate age. And then also when you decide for your kids what is to be expected, like what your behavioral expectations are, what your rules are, you really want to base it on their cognitive age or their mental age or their maturity, not their physical maturity, but their more mental maturity. So if you have a kid who's got a 10-year-old brain, then the rules and the routines they do and the exposure they have to peers should be really based on what's appropriate for that 10-year-old. And it can be difficult sometimes when your kid looks like they're 14 or 15, especially if they're well-spoken and they generally can get their stuff done. It can be tempting to treat them as though they're older. But that's not really fair because you'd be basing that treatment of their physical age versus their cognitive age. So they're going to need the supervision that's appropriate for their mental age. And so when it comes to having a child with early puberty, if you send them off to go hang out at the amusement park and they look like they're 15 and they don't have the ability, the maturity to handle that degree of freedom, right? Or they don't have the supervision that you would normally give that 10 or 11-year-old, then that's going to be more stressful for them. So you want to provide the appropriate supervision, both in person when they're with their friends or you're in a public area, when you're talking about how they conduct themselves in public as well as online. So when it comes to choosing, social media apps or what games they can be involved in or how much freedom they have with email addresses and all of that, you have to think of what's appropriate for the age, not based on what they're expressing they have an interest in. The last one here is recognizing that their social pressures might be different than their same age peers. So I've mentioned this several times. It's just noting that the exposure that they're going to have from looking older could look different than their same age peers. They may just have a different exposure to the world than their peers. So it's really appropriate for you to make sure you have that supervision. Make sure you're really in tune with how they're feeling, that you keep conversation open, that you make sure that there's a soft landing for them if they have any questions or concerns, and that you're there to validate their emotions and let them know that there's no question that's too stupid. You're not going to get in trouble if you had a stressful circumstance and you need some guidance on it. It's really important that they feel very supported by that parent. I have a question that was emailed to me, and I'm going to pull it out before I look at any others here. I wrote it down. Okay. My child has become good friends with an older peer in our neighborhood. The family is nice, but she exposes my child to older kid things, mainly social media. How can I direct this friendship so it stays healthy? So this is a really great question. And she doesn't say her child's name. So it's a little bit harder to answer the question because there is a difference if your child is 15 or 16 versus a child who is 9, 10, or 11. So I'm just going to guess here, and I'm just going to assume this child's a little bit younger because she said that she was concerned about her child being exposed to social media. So that makes me think the child's a little younger. But something to be mindful of is that as a parent of a child who's 9, 10, or 11 years old, you absolutely have decision-making power about who they spend time with, how they get there, what activities they're doing with their friends, making sure that there's a supervising adult at the situation, at the time, during the time they spend with any of their peers. And it's going to be really important that you set those expectations early about what type of peer group your child you deem to be age appropriate. So I'll give you an example. When my kids were somewhere around 7th grade, they were permitted to get an Instagram account. Now, initially we had a limit on the number of friends, people they could friend or add to their Instagram account because I wanted them to keep it to a manageable number, and I didn't want it to be them to be caught up in just getting likes and getting people, just collecting all of these people on Instagram. So we initially had a limit. I want to say it was 50. But one of the rules we had as far as Instagram was you can be friends with kids you know in real life. Absolutely. I want all the people you connect with on Instagram to be people you know in real life. However, they have to be within one grade of your grade. So if you're a 7th grader, you can be friends with 6th graders, you can be friends with 7th graders, you can be friends with 8th graders. Because the temptation was that, let's say they had a friend who was also a 7th grader, and that 7th grader had a brother who was an 11th grader. So now my kid friends their friend who's a 7th grader and then also friends this 11th grader and is exposed to all the content that 11th grader has on their Instagram. And I explained to my kids, like, I know you like this kid. I know when you go and play with your friend, he'll sometimes play basketball with you on the driveway, or he'll swim laps with you in the pool in the backyard, and it's super fun. Nothing wrong with that. But you do not need to have a relationship with this person online and be exposed to their whole friend group or the language they use or the jokes that they share. It just doesn't need to be part of your social world. So you can have that personal connection where he plays basketball with you and your friend when you go over there, but it doesn't have to extend to this whole social media arena and you're being exposed to things that I as a parent am not comfortable with. So that's an example. That's an example of where I set the tone, where the contact that they have with other kids is limited to kids within their age group. So if you have a child who has a friend or an acquaintance who is much older than them, and you have concerns about what that child is exposing your child to, it's really important to let your child know what the boundaries of that relationship is. Maybe they don't spend time outside of whatever activity, youth group at church or the neighborhood Halloween party. Maybe they don't have sleepovers or go and spend time in each other's homes or play video games together or whatever it is. It doesn't mean like we hate this person, we're never talking to them again, but there might have the interactions, the social engagements really be supervised and well monitored. And honestly, older kids can understand this too. So if you were to say, to this older friend, oh gosh, it's so nice that you and my child are such good friends. However, you are kind of a bit older than my daughter. And you get to do a lot of older kids' things that she doesn't get to do. So just keep that in mind. And so there might be times when you guys spend time together that you spend time hanging out at our house or you go swimming in the backyard. But if you want to have other kids over who are more your age, it might not be appropriate for my daughter to come over and play at your house. So you're just being really upfront and honest and letting that child know what the boundaries are so that they can enjoy their friendship and there be enough limits to keep it really safe. So if you have that younger child, it's going to be easier to set the tone. If you have a 15 or 16-year-old kid and they're friends with a 17 or 18-year-old and they're much older and maybe they're getting their driver's license, or this is a friend they know at an after-school job, you might not have the same degree of supervision. But that means it's really important to establish those patterns when kids are younger ages so that they understand what the standards are in your family. When I was at my after-school job as a high schooler, there was definitely older kids that I enjoyed. We spent time with, we were friendly. I spent time with them at work, but it wouldn't have occurred to me to go to some college party or get in a car with them and a bunch of their same age friends. So just keep that in mind as far as what tone you want to set. I'm going to look here at the chat and see if there's questions. Okay. Question here is, do kids who reach puberty at a younger age become sexually active at a younger age? So the answer to this question is it depends. It really depends on the degree of supervision and the degree to which your child is exposed to. So once again, if your child is a 7th grader, but they look like a 10th grader or an 11th grader, and they're permitted to ride home with these kids from school or go to the coffee shop or go to a party or social gathering, then it is more likely that your child is going to be involved in sexual activity because they're spending so much time with older kids who are naturally more sexually active or sexually curious. So, but if you have a child who's well supervised, you keep them hanging out with the same peer group, then they're probably going to be more likely to stay on track with what's appropriate for their age group. So it's not any kind of given. And some kids, no matter how they look, are really in tune with how they feel. And if they don't feel like they're at that stage or they're ready for a boyfriend or girlfriend, they'll stay away from it. But other times kids will gravitate towards those kids who look and act older. And then of course, peer pressure can really impact how they interact with other kids. So it really depends. All right. I do not see any other questions in the chat here. So if you think of any later, reach out. You can reach me at my email, which is drtaraegan@gmail.com. You can check out our website. Let me pull it here to my contact page. So here I have 2 websites. I have a therapy website, which is charlotteparentcoaching.com. And that's if you're a North Carolina resident and you'd like to receive therapy services, that would be a good website to go to. But if you'd like to know more about our podcast, if you'd like to get links to the books that I've written, if you'd like to learn more about public speaking opportunities, then it would be great to go to drtaraegan.com. So thank you so much for listening today. We have an upcoming episode on our podcast this week. Our podcast is called One Day You'll Thank Me, and we are talking about teen depression this week. So please tune in. Those episodes are released every Wednesday. Great. Thanks so much for being here. See you soon.